I pruned their roses, and they clipped each other's wings. But when I learned that the younger brother had seduced the older brother's wife, I realized this garden is full of poisonous thorns. Part 1. Secrets of the California Gardens. I've been tending gardens for the rich folks of California for years now. From Malibu to the hills of Beverly, I've clipped hedges, planted roses, and watched the lives of the elite unfold like some twisted soap opera. These people have money to burn, but their secrets, those are worth more than gold. I'm just a gardener, nobody special, used to be a Marine, so I keep my head down and my opinions sharp. But when you're in someone's backyard long enough, you hear things, you see things. And let me tell you, the Wilson family's backyard is a jungle of thorns. The Wilsons live in a sprawling estate just outside Los Angeles, the kind of place that screams old money and new ambition. I've been working their grounds for a couple of seasons, keeping their lawns pristine while their lives unravel. It's a family of four. Henry Wilson, the patriarch, a construction tycoon with a handshake like a vice. Sheila, his wife, who fusses over her flower beds, but mostly over her youngest son, Jonathan, the elder son, a quiet architect with a good heart. And Samuel, the younger one, a charmer with a smile that hides a snake's bite. Then there's Carrie, Jonathan's wife, pretty as a picture, but with eyes that linger too long on the wrong faces. And little Jack, their 8-year-old, who likes to follow me around while I work, asking why worms don't have legs. I'm not one for gossip, but the Wilsons make it hard to stay neutral. It started with Jonathan. He's the kind of guy you root for. Hardworking, honest, but carrying a weight you can see in the way he slumps when he thinks no one's watching. One afternoon, while I was pruning their lemon trees, he wandered over, coffee mug in hand, and started talking. Not the usual small talk about the weather or how the roses are doing. No, Jonathan opened up about his brother, Samuel, and it was like a dam breaking. Ever have someone in your life who just makes you feel small, he asked, staring at the dirt like it held answers. I kept clipping, letting him talk. He told me about growing up with Samuel, how their mother, Sheila, always put Samuel on a pedestal. The golden child, Jonathan called him, spitting the words like they tasted bad. Samuel was the loud one, the rough one, always getting away with trouble. Jonathan, on the other hand, was the quiet kid, the nerd who liked books and kept to himself. Me, I get it. I was the odd one out in my unit back in the Corps, never fit the mold, but I made it work. Jonathan, though, he was drowning in his own family. He told me stories that made my blood boil. Samuel used to sneak into his room, steal his stuff, comic books, pocket money, even his diary once, and then run to Sheila, whining about whatever Jonathan wrote. When Jonathan complained, Sheila would laugh it off, saying, "Boys will be boys." Boys will be boys? Nah, that's how you raise a bully. Samuel didn't stop there. In school, he'd mock Jonathan's glasses, his height, anything to get a laugh. Worse, he'd egg on the other kids, calling Jonathan names like Four Eyes or Loser. One time, Jonathan said Samuel told him to just go die during a fight. Jonathan was struggling with depression back then, and those words cut deep. I've seen men break under less. Hell, I've been there myself. Sheila never saw the problem. She'd cook Samuel's meals, do his laundry, and tell Jonathan to be a good big brother and help with Samuel's homework. Henry, their dad, was always at work, building his empire, so he didn't notice the war at home. Jonathan learned to fend for himself, but it left scars. I thought it'd get better when we grew up, he told me, kicking a pebble, but Samuel just got meaner. I nodded, keeping my hands busy with the shears. Some folks don't grow up. They just get bigger. Jonathan gave me a half smile, like he appreciated the truth but wished it wasn't so. That's when I started noticing things around the Wilson estate. Samuel would strut around like he owned the place, flashing that grin that got him out of trouble. Sheila doted on him, always asking if he needed cash or if he was eating enough. Jonathan, meanwhile, was invisible to her unless she needed something fixed. Henry was different, gruff, no nonsense, but I could tell he respected Jonathan's work ethic. Samuel, he treated him like a spoiled pet. Then there's Carrie. She's the kind of woman who lights up a room, all smiles and charm. But I've seen her type before, beautiful on the outside, trouble brewing underneath. She'd chat with me sometimes, asking about my work, but her eyes would wander to Samuel when he was around. I didn't think much of it at first, figured she was just friendly, but one day, while I was weeding the rose garden, I overheard her talking to her friend Wendy, who's always hanging around like a vulture, circling a carcass. Wendy's got this sharp laugh that grates on my nerves, and she was saying something about how Carrie deserved a little fun. Carrie giggled, but there was a nervous edge to it. "Jonathan's sweet," she said, "but Samuel, he's got that spark. You know?" Wendy egged her on, whispering something I couldn't catch. I kept my head down, but my gut told me this was trouble. That same week, I was working late, mulching the flower beds near Henry's study. The window was cracked, and I heard him arguing with Sheila. Henry's voice was low, like he was trying to keep it together. "I'm changing the will, Sheila. Jonathan's earned it. Samuel's had enough chances." Sheila's voice shot up, shrill and defensive. "You can't do that to Sammy. He's your son." Henry didn't back down. "He's a grown man, and he's still acting like a spoiled brat. Jonathan's the one keeping this family's name respectable." I didn't stick around to hear the rest, but I knew a storm was coming. $5 million in assets, retirement funds, and real estate. That's what Henry's empire is worth, and Samuel wasn't getting a dime. I kept that to myself, but it got me thinking about loyalty. Back in the Corps, you trusted your brothers with your life. Betrayal wasn't just a word, it could get you killed. The Wilsons, though, they were playing a different kind of war, and the casualties were piling up. Jonathan was fighting to hold onto his dignity. Samuel was fighting to keep his crown. And Carrie, she was playing both sides, with Wendy whispering poison in her ear. Little Jack, bless him, was just caught in the middle, asking me why his dad looked so sad all the time. I didn't have an answer for him, but I knew one thing. This garden was full of weeds, and someone was bound to get cut. As I packed up my tools that evening, I saw Jonathan sitting on the patio, staring at the sunset. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world. I wanted to tell him to stand tall, like I did when I faced down my own demons. But some battles, you gotta fight alone. All I could do was keep tending the garden and keep my ears open. Because in a place like this, the real dirt isn't under the roses. It's in the secrets people think they can hide. Part 2, Thorns of Betrayal. The Wilson estate was starting to feel like a battlefield, and I was just the guy keeping the grass trimmed. I've seen my share of conflict, deserts, jungles, you name it, but nothing cuts quite like family turning on family. The air around the Wilsons was thick with tension, and I could smell trouble brewing like a storm over the Pacific. Jonathan was carrying a wound you couldn't see. Samuel was strutting around like he owned the world. And Carrie? She was dancing on a tightrope with her friend Wendy ready to cut it. Me, I just kept my shears sharp and my ears open, because in a garden like this, the weeds were growing fast. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was planting lavender along the east fence when Jonathan came out, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were hollow, and he was clutching a coffee mug so tight I thought it'd crack. "You ever feel like your whole life's a lie?" he asked, not really expecting an answer. I set down my trowel and let him talk. That's when he dropped the bomb. Carrie had been cheating on him with Samuel, not just a one-time thing, either. It started back when they were engaged during a Thanksgiving visit to the Wilson house. Jonathan had introduced Carrie to the family, hoping she'd feel at home. Instead, she got too cozy with his brother. "She told me last night," Jonathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said it was a mistake, that she was confused. But the worst part, she's not sure if Jack's mine." That hit me like a punch to the gut. Jack, that sweet kid who'd follow me around asking about bugs and dirt, might not be Jonathan's son. I've seen men lose everything: homes, brothers in arms, their own sanity. But losing a child you've raised, that's a different kind of hell. Jonathan was trying to hold it together, but I could see the cracks. "I love that boy," he said. "But if he's Samuel's, I don't know how to keep going." I didn't have words for that. Back in the Corps, we had a saying: you don't fight for the flag, you fight for the guy next to you. Jonathan was fighting for Jack, but the ground was shifting under him. "You're stronger than you think," I told him, dusting off my hands. "But you got to decide what you're fighting for." He nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was already halfway gone. Meanwhile, Samuel was acting like nothing had changed. I saw him one afternoon, lounging by the pool with his buddy Ryan, a slick guy with a laugh that sounded like a used car salesman. They were cracking beers, talking loud enough for the whole estate to hear. "Jonathan's such a pushover," Samuel said, smirking. "Always has been. I take what I want, and he just takes it." Ryan laughed, clinking his bottle against Samuel's. "You're a legend, man. Carrie's hot. Can't blame you." I was pulling weeds nearby, blending into the background like always, but their words made my skin crawl. Samuel wasn't just a bully anymore. He was a predator, and he thought he was untouchable. What Samuel didn't know was that I wasn't the only one listening. Wendy, Carrie's so-called best friend, was lurking by the patio, pretending to scroll on her phone. I'd seen her type before, stirring the pot, thriving on chaos. Later that day, I caught her whispering to Carrie in the gazebo, her voice all sugar and venom. "You deserve someone who lights you up, Carrie," she said. "Jonathan's sweet, but Samuel's got that fire. Why settle?" Carrie looked torn, twisting her wedding ring like it was burning her finger. "I love Jonathan," she said, but it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. Wendy just smiled, like a cat with a mouse in its claws. "Then why are you still texting Sammy?" she teased. Carrie's face went pale, and I knew Wendy was playing a dangerous game. I kept my head down, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Wendy was more than a bad influence. She had this glint in her eye, like she wanted to watch the whole Wilson family burn. I remembered a guy in my unit always pushing others to take risks he'd never take himself. People like that don't just cause trouble, they feed on it. And Wendy was feeding hard. A few days later, I was mulching the rose garden near the house when I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Carrie and Samuel were in the guest room, thinking they were alone. The window was cracked, and their voices carried. "We can't keep doing this," Carrie whispered, her voice shaky. "Jonathan knows, Sam. He's falling apart." Samuel laughed, low and cruel. "Let him fall. You're mine, Carrie. You always have been." There was a pause, then the sound of a kiss. I gripped my rake so hard my knuckles went white. I'm no saint, but there's a code you don't break, especially not with your brother's wife. I didn't tell Jonathan. Wasn't my place. But I started watching closer, noticing how Carrie would avoid his eyes at dinner, how Samuel would smirk when Jonathan wasn't looking. Jack, poor kid, was starting to pick up on it. One day, while I was teaching him how to plant tulip bulbs, he asked, "Why is Daddy so quiet all the time?" I ruffled his hair and said, "Sometimes grown-ups got heavy things on their minds." But inside, I was raging. Jack deserved better than this mess. Things got worse when Henry caught wind of the trouble. I was trimming hedges near his study when I heard him on the phone with Jonathan. "You're telling me Samuel's been sleeping with your wife?" Henry's voice was like gravel, hard and unyielding. "And Jack might not be yours?" Jesus. "Son, why didn't you say something sooner?" Jonathan's reply was too quiet to hear, but Henry wasn't having it. "I'm done coddling that boy," he said. "Samuel's out of the will, and he's out of the company. You're the one I trust, Jonathan." I could hear Sheila in the background, her voice rising in protest. "You can't do this to Sammy. He's your son," Henry shut her down. "He's no son of mine if he's betraying his brother." Sheila didn't take it well. She stormed out of the study, nearly running into me as I hauled a bag of clippings. Her eyes were red, but she didn't say a word. I knew she'd fight tooth and nail for Samuel, like she always had. Growing up, she'd let him get away with everything, stealing Jonathan's money, breaking his things, even telling him to die. Back then, Henry was too busy to notice. But now, he was seeing Samuel for what he was, a grown man who never grew up. $5 million was on the line, and Henry was drawing a line in the sand. I thought about my time in the Corps, about the brothers I lost because someone didn't have their back. Loyalty isn't just a word, it's everything. The Wilsons were tearing that apart, and I couldn't help but wonder how deep the rot went. Carrie was still sneaking around with Samuel, egged on by Wendy's whispers. Jonathan was holding on to his love for Jack, even as the truth threatened to break him. And Samuel? He was playing king, but his crown was slipping. As I loaded my tools into my truck that evening, I saw Jonathan sitting by the pool, staring at the water like it could wash away his pain. Jack was inside, laughing at something on television, oblivious to the storm brewing. I wanted to tell Jonathan to fight, to take back what was his. But some wars you don't win with fists. You win by walking away, or by cutting out the poison. I just hoped Jonathan had the strength to do it, because this garden was about to get a whole lot bloodier. Part 3. The Reckoning. The Wilson estate was a powder keg, and someone had just lit the fuse. I've seen chaos before, gunfire in the desert, men shouting orders over the roar of war, but nothing compares to a family tearing itself apart. The air around the Wilsons was electric, charged with secrets spilling out like blood from a fresh wound. Jonathan was done swallowing his pain, Samuel was cornered, and Carrie was caught in the crossfire. As for me, I was just a gardener, clipping hedges while the world burned. But even I could feel the heat, and let me tell you, this was no ordinary fire. It all came to a head on a Saturday evening, the kind of perfect California night where the sunset paints the sky gold and the rich folks throw parties to pretend their lives are perfect. Henry had called a family meeting, and I was working late, tending to the azaleas near the dining room. The windows were open, and voices carried like shrapnel. Jonathan had had enough. He stood in the middle of the room, his hands shaking but his voice steady as steel. "I'm done pretending," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Carrie's been sleeping with Samuel for years, and Jack, he might not even be mine. The room went dead silent. I kept my head down, pulling weeds, but my heart was pounding. I'd seen Jonathan take hit after hit, Samuel's bullying, Sheila's favoritism, Carrie's lies, but this was different. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the truth. Henry's face was like stone, his eyes boring into Samuel, who was slouched in a chair, trying to look bored. Carrie was crying, her hands twisting in her lap. Sheila predictably jumped to Samuel's defense. "Jonathan, how dare you accuse your brother of something so vile?" she snapped. "You're just jealous, like always." Jealous? I nearly laughed out loud. Jonathan, jealous of a guy who'd spent his life stealing what wasn't his. But Henry wasn't having it. He slammed his fist on the table, making the crystal glasses jump. "Enough, Sheila," he roared. "I've heard the rumors. I've seen the way Samuel looks at Carrie. And Jonathan's not a liar." He turned to Samuel, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "Is it true, boy? Did you betray your brother?" Samuel smirked, but it was shaky, like a kid caught with his hand in a cookie jar. "Come on, Dad, it's not like that," he said, leaning back in his chair. Carrie came on to me. She's the one who couldn't resist. Carrie gasped, her tears stopping cold. "That's a lie," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You pursued me, Sam. You made me feel like I was special." Samuel laughed, cruel and sharp. "Special? Please. You were just bored with Mr. Perfect over there." He jerked his thumb at Jonathan, who looked like he'd been slapped. I gripped my shears, my knuckles white. I'd seen men like Samuel before, cowards who hide behind charm, thinking they can talk their way out of anything. Back in the Corps, we had a guy like that, always dodging blame until he got someone killed. Samuel was the same, but this wasn't a battlefield. It was a family, and he was tearing it apart. Henry stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're done," he said, his voice like a judge's gavel. "You're out of the company, out of the will. $5 million, Samuel, and you won't see a cent. Jonathan's the one who's earned it." Sheila screamed, a sound that could have shattered glass. "Henry, you can't! He's your son!" Henry turned on her, his eyes blazing. "He's no son of mine if he's sleeping with his brother's wife. And if you keep defending him, Sheila, you can pack your bags and go with him." That shut her up, but her face was a mask of shock and fury. Carrie was sobbing now, her head in her hands. Jonathan just stood there, his fists clenched, like he was holding himself together by sheer will. Then came the real bombshell. Jonathan pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket, his hands trembling. "I got the DNA test back," he said, his voice barely audible. "Jack, he's not mine, he's Samuel's." The room felt like it imploded. Sheila gasped, clutching her chest. Henry's face went pale, like he'd aged 10 years in a second. Carrie let out a wail, collapsing into her chair. Samuel, for once, didn't have a comeback. He just stared at Jonathan, his smirk gone, replaced by something I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or shame. I stopped pretending to work, frozen by the weight of it all. Jack, that little boy who'd spent hours helping me plant seeds, wasn't Jonathan's. I thought about the times I'd seen Jonathan carry him on his shoulders, the way his face lit up when Jack laughed. Now it was all ashes. I'd seen loss before, brothers in arms, families back home, but this was a different kind of grief. Jonathan wasn't just losing a son, he was losing the life he'd built. The meeting broke apart after that. Jonathan walked out, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying a mountain. Carrie ran after him, begging him to stay, but he didn't look back. Henry sat down, his head in his hands, while Sheila stormed off, muttering about how unfair it all was. Samuel just sat there, like he was waiting for someone to tell him it was all a joke. I packed up my tools, my mind racing. I'd seen families crack under pressure, but this was something else. This was betrayal, carved into the bone. The next day, I was back at the estate, trimming the hedges near the pool. That's when I saw Wendy, Carrie's vulture of a friend, cornering Samuel by the patio. She had that same sly grin, like she was holding all the cards. "You really screwed this up, Sammy," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "But don't worry, I can keep quiet, for a price." Samuel's face twisted, like he'd swallowed something sour. "You're blackmailing me?" he hissed. Wendy laughed, tossing her hair. "Call it insurance. This story hits the tabloids, and your precious reputation's toast. Pay up or I talk." I kept my head down, but my gut churned. Wendy wasn't just stirring the pot, she was pouring gasoline on it. I'd seen her whispering to Carrie, pushing her towards Samuel, and now she was playing both sides. It reminded me of a mission gone wrong when a double agent sold us out for a quick buck. People like Wendy don't care who gets hurt as long as they come out on top. Then there was Ryan, Samuel's buddy, who showed up later that day. I was raking leaves when I overheard him talking to Henry in the study. Ryan's voice was smooth, like he was pitching a deal. "I've got dirt on Samuel, Mr. Wilson," he said. "Emails, texts, proof he's been skimming from the company. Give me a stake in the business, and it's yours." Henry didn't say much, but I could hear the gears turning. Ryan was a snake, selling out his friend for a piece of the pie. I'd seen loyalty break under less, but it still made my skin crawl. By the end of the week, Jonathan had moved out, crashing at a hotel downtown. I saw him one last time, picking up some clothes from the house. He looked like a ghost, his eyes empty. "I can't stay here," he told me, tossing a duffel bag into his car. "Every time I see Jack, I see Samuel." I wanted to tell him he was more than his pain, that he'd raised Jack like his own. But words don't fix a broken heart. All I said was, "You're tougher than you know, Jonathan. Don't forget that." He gave me a nod, then drove off the sunset, swallowing his taillights. As I locked up the shed that night, I thought about the Corps, about the brothers who'd had my back no matter what. The Wilsons didn't know that kind of loyalty. Samuel had betrayed his blood, Carrie had shattered her vows, and Wendy and Ryan were circling like jackals. Jack was the only innocent one, caught in a war he didn't understand. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing. This garden was bleeding, and the thorns were only getting sharper. Part 4. Roots of Redemption. The Wilson estate was quieter now, like the calm after a bomb goes off, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel peaceful, just empty. Jonathan was gone, Samuel was scrambling, and Carrie was left picking up the pieces of a life she'd helped shatter. I kept tending the gardens, pruning the roses, and watering the lawns. But the real mess was in the house, where trust had been ripped out by the roots. I've seen destruction before, villages leveled, lives upended, but this was different. This was a family, and the wounds they'd carved into each other weren't healing anytime soon. Me, I just kept my hands in the dirt and my eyes open, because even in a broken garden, something's always growing. Jonathan had checked into a hotel downtown, but I saw him a week later when he came back to the estate to grab some paperwork. He looked like he'd aged a decade, his face lined with exhaustion. I was planting marigolds near the driveway, and he stopped to talk, leaning against his car like he needed it to hold him up. "I filed for divorce," he said, his voice flat. "Carrie begged me to stay, said we could work it out. But I can't look at her without seeing Samuel." He paused, staring at the flowers like they might have answers. "And Jack, I love him, but every time I think about him, it's like a knife in my chest." I set down my shovel, wiping sweat from my brow. I'd seen men lose everything in the Corps, homes, families, their own sense of who they were. But losing a kid you'd raised as your own, that's a wound that doesn't close. "You raised that boy," I said. "Blood or not, you're his dad. But you gotta take care of yourself first." Jonathan nodded, but his eyes were distant, like he was still fighting a war inside his head. "I just want to start over," he said, "somewhere far from here." I didn't blame him. Some places are too poisoned to grow anything good. Samuel, meanwhile, was feeling the heat. Henry had followed through on his threat, cutting him out of the company and the will. $5 million, gone. Just like that. I overheard Samuel on the phone one day, pacing by the pool while I trimmed the hedges. He was begging some friend for a loan, his voice sharp with desperation. "I'm good for it, man. I just need a little help," he said. The friend must have said no, because Samuel cursed and threw his phone onto a lounge chair. For the first time, he looked small, like a kid who'd finally run out of excuses. I almost felt sorry for him, almost. Then I remembered Jonathan's face, and any pity dried up fast. Carrie was struggling too. With Jonathan gone, she was living in the guest house, trying to keep things normal for Jack. I saw her one morning, sitting on the patio with a coffee mug, her eyes red from crying. Jack was playing nearby, kicking a soccer ball, but he kept glancing at her like he knew something was wrong. I was weeding the flower beds when Carrie caught my eye. "You must think I'm a monster," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away, just kept working. "I don't judge," I said finally, "but you made choices, and choices have consequences." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I thought I could have it all," she said. "Now I've got nothing." I didn't have much sympathy for her. She'd played with fire, and now the whole family was burning. But Jack, that kid didn't deserve this. He'd come by later that day, helping me water the plants, and asked, "Is Daddy coming back?" I ruffled his hair, hating how heavy the truth felt. "Your dad's figuring things out," I said. But he loves you, kid. Don't ever doubt that, Jack smiled, but it was fragile, like he was holding on to hope with both hands. Sheila was another story. She'd always been Samuel's biggest defender, but Henry's threat to divorce her had shaken her to the core. I caught her one afternoon, sneaking out to meet Samuel at a coffee shop down the road. I was picking up supplies in town and saw them through the window, Sheila handing Samuel an envelope, probably cash. While he looked around like a hunted animal, I didn't tell Henry, but someone else did. That night, I was locking up the shed when I heard them arguing in the study. "You went behind my back, Sheila," Henry shouted. "After everything he's done, you're still enabling him." Sheila was sobbing, her voice raw. "He's my son, Henry. I can't abandon him." Henry's reply was cold as ice. "Then you're choosing him over this family. Pack your things." By the next morning, Sheila was gone, staying with a friend in Pasadena. Henry didn't talk about it, but I could see the toll it took. His shoulders sagged, and his usual bark was quieter. I respected Henry. He was tough, like some of the COs I'd served under, but he wasn't heartless. Cutting off Samuel and now Sheila was his way of protecting what was left of his family, but it was costing him, and I wondered how much more he could take. Wendy, that snake of a friend, was making her move too. With the family in chaos, she saw her chance to cash in. I overheard her talking to a tabloid reporter on her phone, lounging by the pool like she owned the place. "Oh, it's juicy," she said, laughing. "A love triangle, a DNA test, and a $5 million inheritance. I've got all the details." She was selling the Wilsons' dirty laundry, and I had a feeling she'd been planning it from the start. I'd seen her push Carrie towards Samuel, planting ideas like weeds in fertile soil. Now she was harvesting the chaos she'd sown. Ryan, Samuel's buddy, was no better. He'd already tried to barter Samuel's secrets to Henry for a stake in the company, but he wasn't stopping there. I was cleaning the fountain when I saw him schmoozing with one of Henry's business partners at a barbecue. "Samuel's a liability," Ryan said, all charm and fake concern. "I can help you clean house, maybe take on some of his projects." The partner nodded, intrigued, and I knew Ryan was playing a long game. Loyalty meant nothing to him. He was just another vulture circling the carcass. Jonathan, though, was starting to find his footing. I got a call from him one day asking if he could swing by the estate to pick up a few things. When he showed up, he looked different, still tired, but there was a spark in his eyes I hadn't seen before. "I got a promotion," he said, a small smile breaking through. "Big project in San Francisco. I'm moving there next month." I clapped him on the shoulder, genuinely proud. "That's the spirit," I said. "New soil, new growth." He nodded, then hesitated. "I've been seeing a therapist," he admitted, "trying to figure out how to live with all this. I don't know if I can ever forgive Carrie or Samuel, but I'm trying to let go of the hate." That hit me hard. Back in the Corps, I'd carry my own grudges, wounds from brothers who'd let me down. Letting go wasn't easy. It was like pulling shrapnel out of your soul. But Jonathan was trying, and that took guts. Before he left, he did something that stuck with me. He grabbed a sapling from the nursery and planted it in the garden, right by the patio. "For Jack," he said, patting the soil, "maybe one day he'll know I was here." I didn't say anything, just watched him work, the sun setting behind him like a promise of something better. As I packed up my tools that night, I thought about the Wilsons' garden. It was still a mess. Thorns everywhere, roots tangled with lies. Samuel and Carrie were together now, trying to raise Jack, but I could see the cracks already. Sheila was out of the picture, and Henry was holding the line. But at what cost? Wendy and Ryan were still scheming, thinking they'd come out on top, and Jonathan was starting over, planting new roots in a city far from here. I didn't know how it would all end, but I knew one thing. In a garden this broken, something had to grow. Whether it was redemption or ruin, only time would tell. Part 5. Seeds of Tomorrow. The Wilson estate wasn't the same anymore. The manicured lawns and blooming roses were still there, but the heart of the place felt different, like a garden after a long drought, waiting for rain. Jonathan had moved on, Samuel was scraping by, and the family that once seemed unbreakable was scattered like leaves in the wind. I kept tending the grounds, same as always, my hands in the dirt while my mind pieced together the stories I'd witnessed. I've seen endings before, missions that wrapped up clean, others that left scars. But this one lingered, like the scent of jasmine after a storm. The Wilsons saga wasn't over, and I had a feeling the final chapter would leave its mark. It was a crisp fall morning when Samuel reached out to Jonathan. I was raking leaves near the guest house when I overheard Carrie on the phone, her voice tight with frustration. "He's calling Jonathan," she told someone, probably Wendy. He's got no one else to turn to. Samuel was in deep trouble, debts piling up, no job prospects, and the weight of raising Jack with Carrie, who was barely holding it together. I didn't hear the details, but I could guess. Samuel, the golden child, had fallen hard, and now he was crawling back to the brother he'd betrayed. Jonathan told me about the call later that week. He'd driven down from San Francisco to check on the estate's garden. He'd taken to visiting now and then, keeping the sapling he'd planted for Jack alive. We were kneeling in the dirt, mulching around the young tree, when he opened up. "Samuel called me last night," he said, his voice steady but heavy. "Said he's drowning. Can't pay his bills, can't handle Jack. He begged me to talk to Dad, to get him back in the family." Jonathan paused, tossing a handful of mulch. He even apologized. First time in his life, I think. I kept working, letting him talk. "What'd you say?" I asked, glancing at him. Jonathan's face was hard to read, part anger, part something softer, like regret. I laughed, he admitted. Told him he should have thought about that before he slept with my wife and got her pregnant. Said Carrie and Jack are his problem now, not mine. He shook his head, like he was shaking off the memory. But then he started crying, man. I've never heard Samuel cry, not since we were kids. That hit me. I'd seen Samuel as a lot of things. Bully, betrayer, coward, but never broken. I thought about my time in the Corps, about a guy in my unit who'd screwed up bad, cost us a mission. When he broke down, begging for forgiveness, it didn't erase what he'd done, but it made him human. "What are you going to do?" I asked, brushing dirt off my hands. Jonathan sighed, looking at the sapling. I told him we're done, that he's not my brother anymore, but I don't know. Part of me feels like I'm kicking a man when he's down. I nodded, thinking about the thin line between justice and vengeance. "You don't owe him nothing," I said. "But you gotta live with yourself. Whatever you choose, make sure it's for you, not him." Jonathan gave me a look like he was weighing my words. Then he went back to mulching, and we didn't talk about it again. But I could tell it was eating at him, the way old wounds do. A few days later, Jonathan made a decision that surprised me. He called me from the city asking if I'd be around the estate. "I'm coming down," he said. "I want to see Jack." I was trimming the hedges when he showed up, looking nervous but determined. Carrie brought Jack out to the garden, and the kid's face lit up when he saw Jonathan. "Daddy!" he shouted, running straight into his arms. Jonathan hugged him tight, his eyes wet, and for a moment it was like the world hadn't broken them. Carrie hung back, watching her expression a mix of hope and guilt. They spent the afternoon together, planting flowers near the sapling. Jack chattered about school, his new soccer team, and how he missed Jonathan's bedtime stories. Jonathan listened, smiling, but I could see the pain in his eyes. When Jack ran off to chase a butterfly, Jonathan turned to me. "I can't be his dad anymore," he said quietly. "Not like before, but I can't abandon him either. He's not Samuel. He's just a kid." I clapped him on the shoulder. "That's the man I figured you for," I said. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly, but it was something stronger, love, maybe, or duty. Meanwhile, the rest of the Wilson family was unraveling. Sheila, still living with her friend in Pasadena, sent Jonathan a letter. I was there when he opened it, sitting on the patio while I cleaned my tools. Her handwriting was shaky, the words raw. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "I failed you as a mother, choosing Samuel over you. I see now what he did, what I let him become. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I love you." Jonathan read it twice, his jaw tight, then folded it and put it in his pocket. "I don't know if I can forgive her," he told me, "but I'm tired of carrying hate." I nodded, thinking about my own ghosts. Letting go isn't easy, but it's the only way to grow. Henry, on the other hand, was facing his own reckoning. A week after Jonathan's visit, he had a heart attack. I was at the estate when the ambulance came, sirens cutting through the morning calm. He pulled through, but it shook him. I saw him a few days later, sitting in his study, looking frailer than I'd ever seen. He'd rewritten his will again, and he showed me the changes, not because I asked, but because he needed to tell someone. "Jonathan gets the bulk," he said, his voice rough. "But I'm setting aside a trust for Jack's education. Nothing for Samuel. He made his bed. I didn't say much, just listened." Henry was a hard man, but he was trying to make things right, even if it was late. As for the vultures, they got what was coming. Wendy's tabloid deal fell apart when the reporter backed out, and she skipped town, leaving behind a trail of angry texts from Carrie. Ryan's scheming backfired too. Henry caught him cooking the books on a company project, and he was fired. His dreams of a stake in the empire gone. I saw him one last time loading boxes into his car, muttering about how Samuel had dragged him down. Loyalty's a funny thing. It only lasts until the money runs out. The final scene played out on a sunny afternoon with Jonathan and Jack back in the garden. They were planting daisies, Jack's favorite, laughing as they got dirt on their hands. Jonathan looked lighter, like he'd shed some of the weight he'd been carrying. Carrie watched from a distance, but Jonathan didn't acknowledge her. He was there for Jack, not her. I packed up my tools, ready to head to my next job, but I paused to take it in. The sapling Jonathan had planted was growing, its leaves bright against the soil. The Wilson garden wasn't perfect, never would be, but it was alive, and that was something. As I drove away, I thought about what I'd learned from the Wilsons. Family isn't just blood, it's the choices you make. The people you fight for. Jonathan chose Jack. Even after everything, Henry chose justice, even when it cost him his wife. Samuel and Carrie, they chose themselves, and now they were living with the consequences. Me, I'm just a gardener, moving from one estate to the next, but I carry these stories like seeds. Some take root, some don't. But this one will stay with me, a reminder that even in the most broken ground, something can grow. The question is, what'll it be? Redemption or just more thorns? Thanks so much for watching. Your likes, subscriptions, and comments mean the world, and keep these stories coming.